Hey guys, I don't know if anybody's here or not. Excuse how I look. I've been really sick. Thank God. Thank you for your prayers. I am way better today than I've been probably since Tuesday. I think the fever finally broke. Um, but I'm not 100% by a long shot. I have tried to do this. I did it in a live stream last week before I got sick, and oh gosh, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Um, the sound quality was horrible from my laptop, and you can't even understand things. And then weird people got on the comments and said inappropriate things, and I didn't know how to block them or get them off. So I'm going to delete that video. I did finally think get the comments off. So the backstory, and then I tried to do it in the park, thinking it'd be nice and quiet. And every time I had it up ready to go, mowers come by, leaf blowers. I mean, it's a massive park, and they came right on me every time. So I've had a lot of opposition on getting this out. I think it's a really cool backstory, though. I'm going to say a prayer before I get started. God, thank you that you are with us. Thank you that you are a healer. Thank you for how wonderfully you've been speaking, God. Oh my gosh, your presence is more to us than anything, and let it always mean more to us than the promise. And anything that you could ever bring us is never going to be more than you, never going to be more important and crucial and beautiful and wonderful than your presence. And I know that even though we've been in a time of struggle and a wilderness season, I know from experience that when we're going through it, it may feel really hard, but when we look back, sometimes we realize that was some of the sweetest times, God, the sweetest times in our life, that you were so near. And please, just the same way that Moses said, when you led him to go forward to take the promised land, he said, if your presence doesn't go with us, then don't go. I think it was Moses. It could have been Joshua, either one. Could have been both. But if your presence won't go with us, then we don't want to go in the promised land. We want your presence to go wherever we go, whatever we go through. And we just ask that you would bless my words and let this be to your glory, and bless everyone watching this. Lift their spirits, give them strength, keep speaking to them, and speak through them. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Okay, so uh, the backstory, the thing is, a lot of us kept reading and hearing the term bless your socks off. And that was significant to me for other personal reasons. Hey, Nicole, can you finally hear me? So that was significant to me for personal reasons. Um, but it kept coming up and coming up. And then I realized it wasn't just coming up for me, it was coming up for multiple people. Um, and so I think it's a corporate word for the body of Christ, and especially for you guys. I'm glad to see you too. Um, Especially for you guys that are going through similar things and waiting on the promise, especially a lot of you that are in Shelly's graduates group, which has been such a tremendous blessing. Thank you, Shelly, for that. I'm sorry I'm a mess. I can't pretty today. I probably can't pretty most days. But um, anyway, so since we kept seeing that term, bless your socks off, or God's going to knock your socks off, and it kept coming up and coming up. I think it may have been Nicole, who is on here now, who mentioned there's something more to it. Because I said, well, it just means, to bless you tremendously, to just blow you away, tremendous blessings. And that in itself is enough to be excited about. But someone kept saying that there's more to it. There's more to it than that. And so I decided to look it up and research it. And so the origin of the phrase, bless your socks off, actually come from a bishop in Calcutta whose name was George something Cotton. And so the phrase become bless your cotton socks. So I didn't know anything about that. And the reason that they said that is because this bishop um, got socks. He'd order them crates of socks for these children in this school, and so that they would have warm socks and good socks and things like that. I guess they were really poor kids, maybe in an orphanage. And when the crates of any materials would come through for that school and for those kids, he would bless whatever the materials were that they were going to use before he would distribute them. And so the phrase become what turned out, what happened is this man, this bishop, this is really sad actually, he drowned in the Ganges, it's Ganges, he drowned And when he did, someone said, "Who's going to bless his cotton socks?" And the reason why is they had written on the crate something about it being a crate to save it for it to be blessed by Cotton, by Bishop Cotton, but they were misunderstanding what was written on the crate, and they thought they meant cotton socks. And so someone said, "Who's going to bless his cotton socks?" And so people would use the term kind of like "bless your little heart," which in the South, some people, when they say "bless your little heart," they don't really mean that as sweetly as it sounds. My family used it sweetly. We really would say it like, "Oh, that's terrible. I can't believe you went through that. Bless your heart." But I found out from a lot of other Southern people that they use it kind of derogatory, like if their husband can't find something or something and he's being I don't know if he's doing, or not even a husband, but whoever is doing something kind of stupid or, whatever, made a bad decision or they don't know how to do something, you'll say, "Oh, bless your little heart." It's kind of like you're being condescending. But my family didn't grow up saying it that way. So I think I got myself in trouble thinking I was being sweet to people saying, "Bless your little heart," or "bless your heart." And they were used to the derogatory way of saying it, and I was actually being kind and compassionate. But I finally had someone who was bold enough to tell me, "Why did you say that to me? My family uses that term to basically say, 'You stupid idiot.'" And I was like, "That's absolutely not what I'm doing." So that's a little folklore if you're not from the South. If some people from the South say "bless your heart," they really may mean it. If I say it, I mean it. Uh, some people could be talking down to you, but it was actually it would come from that term, that bishop, and his last name is Cotton. You could look it up, and he was blessing the socks. So the term became "bless your socks off." So that's where that originated. Now, biblically, I was looking this up, and I was wondering. Now, in the Bible, I don't see any mention of socks. I think they probably wore a lot of sandals anyway, and we know sandals do not look good with socks. Sorry, I have to be a smart aleck. Anyway, so this is what I looked up though instead. There were not, if you think of your socks being off, you're basically barefoot. So I was looking at taking off a shoe, and I knew that there was something in there about a ceremony of the shoe, and I found it. So it's called the halitza. I may be saying it wrong. It's a Jewish term, and it means to draw off, and it's the removal of shoes. And they use it to seal a covenant. So it's like if you're having some sort of a transaction take place, it signifies a transfer of property. It can also mean that this is really cool. I love this. They do it publicly. They do this publicly as a witness, as a testimony before witnesses to show that the transaction is complete. Now that gets me excited because if God is saying He's going to bless our socks off, and we're looking at promises that He's given, and He talks about taking us into the promised land, and that's a covenant, and a promise is a covenant, but it's stronger than just a regular promise between people. A covenant is, in Bible times, it was binding, legally binding. Um, like marriage is a covenant, and it takes both people. I think there are two types of covenants actually. One is a covenant that God seals Himself, and it's just irrevocable and it has nothing to do with us keeping our part. And then there's a type of covenant that does take both parties keeping their part of the covenant. But when God has made a promise to us, I think our part is to believe. And unless He tells you something else, and that's fine. But so if He's going to bless our socks off, and we think about this ceremony of the shoe, the halitza, um, it can signify that He's transferring that property, He's transferring that promise, He's transferring that land, that promised land to us. I get really excited hearing that. Um, but if you look also in Ruth, chapter 4, 7 through 8, it talks about that occurring, that ceremony of the shoe occurring between Ruth and Boaz. Because as you know, Ruth, Boaz was her kinsman, and he could take her on as his wife. And back then, that was kind of a business transaction. I'm sorry, I'm in a graveyard, and there are ravens or crows flying around. It was really distracting. Um, one of those look a squirrel kind of brains, but instead it was look a crow. But anyway, focus. Um, they even had that ceremony take place, the ceremony of the shoe. And at that point, she had another closer relative, male relative, that had first dibs kind of to marry her and therefore take on her as his wife. But also, whenever they would do that, there was a transfer of any of her family's land and any of her property. They had to take on the care and keeping and leadership, and they took her on as their wife. So that means they were going to take care of her financially and things. But that also means that if she owned anything, they took on her family's ownership. So it was a business transaction in a big sense of the word that way. So she had to go first to that nearer relative and say, okay, or Boaz had to, and say, do you want to take her on? And he didn't want to. The whoever the other guy was, I don't know if it even names him, but he was the next of kin. And so then they had to have a ceremony to show that Boaz did in fact take Ruth on, and that he did want to marry her and to take that on. And so there was a ceremony of the shoe for that. And so that was that part. But I think it's really exciting, and I really love that it said it was publicly done, because we keep talking about how and keep hearing from God that He's going to do what He does in our life as far as giving us these promises. He's going to do it publicly. He's going to do it in front of everyone that have watched us suffer and maybe go through things that haven't been fair and injustices, and watched us struggle. I think there's a lot of people that may see us as Christians, and this has bothered me even with my own kid. People have seen us, and they will see that we're dedicated and we love the Lord and we're loyal and we're obeying, and to what looks like to our own detriment sometimes, that we're sacrificially obeying, and then they see us still just suffer and struggle. Now, I know they've seen God bless me in tremendous ways too, but never like I'm ever getting ahead. And when it comes to healing, I've never been fully healed. And a lot of people that are not Christians that are in my life, or maybe used to be and are wavering in their faith, they've even said things about how why why is it that you're serving God and God's supposed to help you and bless you, but you're never ahead. You're not healed. And people in the Bible times, they would say too, why do the wicked prosper and then the faithful suffer? But God doesn't do that forever. He doesn't allow any suffering unless it's going to be for our good. And it doesn't feel that way, but it's making us stronger and it's building character. But the time does come where He blesses us in a public way, in a big way, and He shows up in our life. And that's what's getting ready to happen. And I'm anxious for that. I don't want my daughter to see me obey the Lord for years and do the difficult things. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional, but see me get hit, over and over and over in many ways. I don't want that to be what she remembers. I want her to see this big finale, where she goes, whoa, it did pay off. It did pay off. I watched mom struggle. I watched her get hit, but it did pay off. And I want her to see that before I have chills talking about this. She's in high school now, and there are a lot of big changes in her life and a lot of big decisions coming, and she's making her faith her own. But I see her struggle some, and I want her to see the benefit of serving God, and before she goes off on her own and thinks, well, what's the point? Mom served God and she's still sick and she's still this and still struggling. I want her to see that there is a payday, there is a benefit, and we don't do it for the payday. If all we ever had was Jesus dying for our sins and us going to heaven, that's more than we deserve. But I want people that may be weaker in their faith or younger, like my kid and like some of my friends, they might not understand that to be gratifying enough. I want them to see the depths of God's love for His children. And I know they see it in spurts, but I almost want the blessing and the promise more for them and their benefit than I even do for myself, because the truth is I can stay how I am I've learned to be content. I'm going to be okay. God is with me in the night seasons, He's with me in the struggles. He has been so near. He can give you a peace that passes understanding so that even while you suffer, it can be a beautiful, close to Him experience and wonderful thing. I can do this. I've done a lot. I've been through a lot. I can do this. So even if I didn't have the promises, I know I can make it. But I want the promises because I want people to see the glory of the Lord. I really do. And I believe He's about to do that and bless us publicly. So that's the first thing. And so the ceremony of the shoe being a thing that's done in public for witnesses to see, I love how that is connected to um, how when God, He completes a transaction, as that is said, for us, that's done publicly so that people see that covenant sealed and the blessing in being obedient and serving the Lord. Because I know that He wants to woo people, He wants to woo them, He wants to show off His power and His glory and His love, and He wants them to see what we have and to want what we've got. Um, and so that just gets me excited. So the next thing, though, I looked up another time that the shoes were off in the Bible had to do with whenever they were standing on holy ground or hallowed ground. And the two different times that this was most relevant were in Exodus and in Joshua. And if you know the books of the Bible enough to know what's going on in those books, you're gonna already kind of know what it was preceding. And I have to have some water. Sorry, I'm still sick. So sorry. Um, in Exodus, when it came up, it was in Exodus 3:5, and it was whenever Moses was before the burning bush. And so, Moses had defended one of his people when he saw them being beaten up by one of the Egyptians, and he murdered a man, and then ran off, to the desert and the wilderness for 40 years. And then, right when God was ready to send him back in to rescue his people, He came to him in the form of a burning bush. And it's in that part that He told him, take off your shoes, where you're standing is holy ground. Now, if we think about socks being blessed off, and we compare it instead in biblical times to shoes being off, then look at when that happened. It happened as God was announcing His promise to rescue His people, and it happened as He was sending him out. He was giving him his orders to go back in, and it was like He was projecting him into his calling. And so when He's telling him it's a blessing, it is, and his socks are off, not socks, but shoes were off, and it was when he was on holy ground, because he was sending him into the blessing and the promise and the rescuing of his people. And that's when his feet were bare. So that's significant because we're on the precipice of that same thing. Okay, that's exciting. Joshua, if you look at 5 and read the whole chapter, it's specifically, though, in Joshua 5:15. I'm sorry, I have to drink. Joshua was told by a random man come up to him. What had happened is that the people who didn't make it into the promise, as they were going to go into the promised land, because Moses died and Joshua took over leading them in. They were journeying towards the promised land. They'd already made a lot of progress, but they set up camp. And what they did is that the original people that died off, the men that died off, who didn't make it into the promised land because it was 40 years, they wandered in the desert. A lot of people died and could not go forward into the promise. And a lot of that was because they're complaining and they're murmuring, and that's why it took them so long, because it was only an 11-day journey. But their murmuring and their complaining they weren't ready. They had to go through what they had to go through to be ready for the promise. And because it took so long, many people didn't receive the promise because they died before they could go in. But they had children during that 40-year period, a lot of children were born. Sorry. And so their children were going to go in. But what happened is the first group of men, God had them be circumcised. And that was a commitment and a sign, and there was a lot of significance behind that. And so the new batch of boys that were growing up and that were going to be going into the promised land, who had not died off, obviously, because they were young, they had to be circumcised. They had another ceremony, basically, of circumcision. So in that time of the healing from the circumcision, they set up camp and they rested and they healed from the circumcision before they were to go into take the promised land entirely, to go into Jericho. I feel like that's significant too, because I think for me and from what I've heard from a lot of you, we've been in this season of journeying toward our promise. But in that season, some things have had to be cut away. And boy, this is speaking more than I knew. Some painful things have had to happen for a purpose. And for me, without going into too much detail, I went through some incredibly painful things last year. Some of them were repeats of things I'd been through in the past, which is really funny because circumcision was a repeat. They went through it, the fathers went through it, and then later it had to be repeated for the sons. I did not know this was going to line up this way. That's just God. I went through some things in 1999 that were very traumatic, two particular ones. And I thought I had healed from them. You know, I'd been to counseling for some of it, but I carried this fear. You know, I think sometimes when you go through traumatic things, even if you do heal to a degree, you tell yourself, I've got to make sure that doesn't happen again. You know, some part of you thinks maybe I wasn't protective enough, or maybe I made decisions, or I don't know. You're protective. You're protective. You don't want to go through that again, you know? And because of that, I carried fear around. I thought that I had great faith in God. And I did in many, many areas. But in those areas of woundedness, I was not healed. And I thought that I was. I thought that being cautious and protective was smart. I thought it was being smart. I thought I was keeping something bad from happening again. I thought it was my responsibility to be protective and cautious. Um, I thought that was part of the lesson of what I went through. But it carried over into fear and anxiety. And it ruled my life far more than I knew. Far more. Um, and I could go into detail about how that transpired. And that's something I've probably touched on some in other videos. And I can again, if you've been through certain traumatic events and you would want me to address some of those things, do you have any questions about any of that, let me know. And I can address that at another time. But the point is, ironically enough, going through almost the same events again that I went through in 99, I went through again in 2017. And when one of them happened in February, I was flabbergasted because I thought I went through this already and it was horrible the first time and it never should have happened. And I've spent my life trying to prevent it from ever happening again. I've built my life around protecting myself and my daughter and anyone I knew. You know, don't do this, don't go here, don't make this happen, you know, whatever it might be. Being cautious, always watching over my shoulder. Like even where I'm sitting now, I've sat here before. I used to sit here if I had to take a phone call. I would sit in this very graveyard, which sounds weird, but I'm a photographer, so I used to love to go and take pictures of some of the statues in the graveyard because they're just beautiful. You could get a really great angle with the sky, you know, the blue up above it. And so people always tease me and thought it was kind of weird that I would hang out in graveyards. But when I would do that, it's like I wanted to be there enough that I would do that and come and drive and take pictures. But I was always looking over my shoulder and always afraid because I would be approached or I would be harassed or things would happen. And I thought, well, and people would tell me, you know, they'd be like, don't go places alone, don't do this, don't do that, you got to be safe. But for that matter, that was even coming. There's a certain level of cautiousness, but there's a certain level of fear, and that was coming from a place of fear, even on that. But um, everything I did, I was so hyper vigilant, and that comes from trauma. Um, but I think I still saw that as something to hold on to, not something to be healed and to release to the Lord. And I didn't see it as a lack of faith. I didn't see it as me not believing that God could protect me. I saw that as I have a responsibility to protect myself. I have to be smart. And you do. But when you believe God and you trust God, and this is what I've learned now, a few things. One, beyond normal cautiousness, it's not your job to keep yourself safe all the time. It's God's job. And if you really believe that He loves you and He's watching out for you, we're supposed to be able to handle snakes without, getting bit. We're supposed to have that kind of faith. Not that we should go grab them, that's not the point. But we're not supposed to have fear. But when you've been traumatized, you have fear of that. It does bring on a spirit of fear. But God has not given us a spirit of fear. So He's given us a spirit of power and love and a sound mind. And I would say that scripture, but I didn't connect to the fact that sometimes the point of the hardships and the trauma that you go through, that the devil sends against you, is not the actual event itself, it's the spirit that's left behind. Because the event could happen in a matter of seconds or minutes or hours, whatever, and be over with. But the lasting effect of fear or anxiety or depression or whatever might happen, some people's fear of suicide, I've been there before. That's what the devil is really trying to accomplish in trauma. It's the spirit that's left behind, the spirit that the healing that doesn't take place and the woundedness from that event. The event can be brief. It's the spirit left behind. So we have to get healing for that. But ironically enough, it devastated me, and I think I was even really angry, because I kept having so many things happen harsh and bad and painful, and I thought, God, I'm obeying you, and I'm trying so hard. And no matter what bad happens to me, I'm still dedicated. I still love you. I still obey you, sacrificially and far from perfect, of course, and probably very blinded to a lot of my own sins and things that needed to change, and prideful, definitely. But a good heart, I would not tell God no. I might say, are you sure, God? Do I have to? But I would not tell God no. I would not disobey purposely without quickly repenting, and to see that I could live that way and that yet still there'd be so much hurt, so much trauma, so much hardship and sickness and pain. Um, I was doing the best I could. And then in living a life of obedience, I still got just slammed with some of the harshest circumstances. And when that final bit started happening last year, and I had a repeat of a trauma, I, I really honestly was angry. I was angry. Did you see where I burned my arm on the frying pan? I'm sorry, I just noticed that. I was cooking and I put it right on the pan, so I've got a scar from that. I'm so easily distracted. Maybe, but you know what? That came up for a reason too. We get scars, we get scars from our woundedness. But the really cool thing, scar tissue is stronger than regular tissue. It is than regular skin. Scar tissue, after being burned or hurt or cut, that tissue grows back tougher than the other skin that was there ever was before. So maybe I noticed my scar for a reason. Gosh, God blows my mind. Maybe it's okay for us to have visible scars. Maybe it's okay for us to have visible scars. Our scars do tell our stories, and they are a sign to other people that we've been wounded too, so that we know what it's like to hurt, but that we made it through stronger. And that can be a testament to God's healing power. So, what happened full circle is that even though it devastated me and hurt me, and I fell apart, and I even did get angry, that I went through the same sort of a trauma again when I thought I was doing everything right to avoid it. It it took that process of me going through it again to heal in a way that I did not heal the first time that it happened. I thought I had that happen, you know, and God didn't want me carrying that around anymore. So He used, the devil takes good things and distorts them and tries to use them for bad. Um, I could name several things, like God made sex. He created sex for a reason, for good reasons. But the devil distorted sex. And now it brings so much pain and so much um, woundedness and hurt and disease and broken lives because it's out of order. It's distorted from the way that God created it to be. But it in itself is a blessing. You just have to have things within God's boundaries. And that's not to limit us, that's to protect us. But since the devil takes something good and distorts it and tries to use it for bad, God is the total opposite. He takes the bad and he's going to bring good from it. He will bring good from it. If you'll let him, if you'll seek him for it, if you'll watch for it and believe for it. Um, and maybe sometimes even when you're not, when you're too broken to even know how to look for it or believe for it, he can still do that. I was so broken this next time. The first time I went through the type of trauma I'm talking about, um, I didn't miss a beat. I've always been the type that would just keep pressing on. I was student teaching at the time, 40 hours a week, and then doing lessons at home, preparing them. I was taking class on the side, ready to graduate. I was a youth leader, volunteer, and I worked a job also. I was going about 80 hours a week at that time, back whenever the first time that the major trauma I'm discussing had happened. I took one day off. I took one day off from this major trauma and I hit the ground running. I decided that I'd come so far working my way through college. I had to graduate in a couple months and nothing was going to stop that. And the expectation of me was always to kind of suck it up and smile and keep going. And that's what I did, no matter how many traumas would come. And I later talked to a counselor about different things that weren't even relevant to what had happened, but later on, years later, and I was discussing different traumas in my life, and you have to kind of give them the background. I'm like, well, this happened then, and this happened then, and this happened then, and she was kind of floored, and she goes, "You don't even pause to let yourself mourn or feel. You just go through it, and you power through." And I thought I was proud of that. I was like, yeah, yeah, that was good, wasn't it? That was good, right? I just hit the ground running. I kept going. And she was like, no, that's actually not healthy. You have to pause. You have to mourn. And that's weird because I'm in a graveyard and when I was driving to find a place to stop here, I was thinking of how different people in my life can have bad things happen to them, even my daughter. And because I don't want them to be sad and I don't want them to cry and I don't want them to hurt, I've not let them mourn. And it's never been because I don't care how they feel or I don't see their pain. I think it's because my survival technique my whole life to power through. Like, yes, that sucks. Yes, that hurts. But let's keep going. Let's keep going. And it hurts me to think that I've hurt other people by not letting them feel and not letting them mourn. But anytime, like with my daughter, from the time she was little, we went through some really hard things. I was in an abusive marriage and it took a lot to get out. I tried for a really long time. And because she had to hear so many scary, sad things, I guess I just wanted her to be happy when we got out. I wanted her to be happy. And I think it hurt me so bad if she ever did cry for very long. Or, as she was a little older, she would get in depression. And I didn't want to call it depression because, one, I think there's power in her words and I didn't want to speak that over her life. But she would say, Mom, my counselor even says I'm in a depression, depressed. And I said, she doesn't need to speak that over you, you know, but I can do things like that. Well, the other day, even she was getting sick, but it was acting like a sinus allergy thing for days. There was no fever, no other signs. Everyone I knew in this part of the country was having allergy problems. And so I said, Sweetie, it's probably just allergies. You're good. You're good. It's going to be okay. Here, have some honey and cinnamon, have some thieves oil. We treat things naturally. Do you have a fever? No, you're good. Okay. No, let's not say you're sick. God's going to work this out. We're speaking life. She got upset with me because she said, Mom, you wouldn't validate that I was even sick. You wouldn't even validate that. And I was like, she really, and she didn't get mad immediately. My daughter would not tell me immediately that hurt her feelings or made her feel invalidated. She just, for a few days after that, she'd get really grumpy and she'd start fights with me. And so I knew from the way she handles things that there's something deeper she's not talking about. Finally, I said, okay, I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of you fighting me. What is really the problem? What is there? There's something in there that happened a week ago or whatever, and you've not told me. Let's talk about it. And so I finally got it out of her because she was actually really mean to me while I was sick. And I thought, I'm good to her when she's sick. I waited on her and get her popsicles and all this stuff. And so she was like fighting with me, mean to me while I was my worst sick. And I was like, that hurts. Why are you so harsh while I'm at my worst sick? And she finally came out with, well, you didn't even validate when I was sick. And I was like, oh my gosh, I did. I took care of you. I did this. I did this. And she said, but before the fever came, for days, I was telling you I didn't feel well, and you kept downplaying it. And I said, well, honey, it's not because I didn't validate it. It's because I didn't want to speak that over you. And it's also because I guess I don't want to see you sick. I don't want to think you're suffering, and I don't want you to bring that suffering on yourself. And she can be very negative and speak a lot of negative, and so I do try to help her speak positive. But there are also times that when she was going through things emotionally, um, me, oh, oh no, oh no, the phone's turning off now. I'll play the second part of this, but if it shuts off, then that's, whatever God wants to happen. But it says it's going to shut down. I don't know if it is or not. Um, but I don't want to invalidate someone and not let them mourn, but I hadn't let myself mourn the things that I had been through. Um, and I felt like that was a good coping tool to help me carry on and not break down. So I think when I've seen people suffering, I quickly want to cheer them up. I quickly want to move them forward to the happy things of, I feel like I felt like I'd let them mourn, I'd let them be sad and care, but I was so quick to be like, okay, but let's move forward. Okay, let's look at what good's coming. Let's keep our mind focused on the happy. Let's make plans. Let's plan for good. Let's don't settle here. Let's not camp out here. Let's move forward, I guess, toward the promised land. And it sounds to me like they had to take a rest. They had to camp. They had to heal. God had them stop and camp and heal before they could move forward. So I wasn't doing it the right way, but that was the way I had coped. And it took me going through what I went through again for me to realize that you have to feel what you're feeling. You have to experience it. Sometimes you do have to camp out in that pain to heal, to acknowledge, the hurt, to get through it. And I don't still understand it all, but I do know that I handled the trauma different this time. I let myself break down. There were times I couldn't go get groceries. I'd sit outside in the car like I'm sitting now and try to psych myself into going in. And I'm a really extroverted person when it comes to being social, and I've never had social anxiety of any kind. I don't really know a stranger. I'm a big talker. Too much of a talker, obviously. um but I had such anxiety I couldn't even do simple tasks, and I allowed that. I did not make myself power through the trauma this time. I fell apart, and I let myself fall apart, and I was unapologetic about it and angry. And I don't usually let myself get angry for very long. I get it and I move on. And that's good in a way. But I think there's a righteous anger over things that happen that are wrong. And I let myself be angry. And I might have went too far. I probably went too far. I probably was, I didn't deny myself. I didn't put everything and everyone else first this time. I did put myself first and I took it too far. Sometimes you have to go to extremes to find the middle ground. But there was such healing in the fact that I did camp out in my pain for a little while. I did. I had to break down. I had to rest. Um, and the blessing in that is in that rest. God met me and He spoke to me and He healed me and He gave me dreams and He showed me that He is enough. And I've been delivered from fear and anxiety tremendously, tremendously. The very fact that I've not been looking over my shoulder the whole time I've been parked here, um, that says a lot, even. I'm not afraid anymore. The devil will try to put fear. I'll still have that moment of, you know, on something, panic, fear. And I'll go, no, we're done with this. We're done with it. And that's amazing because I carried it in me and with me for so long. I carried it around. Um, and I'm healed from that now. Praise the Lord. I'm healed from it. So this, I guess, came up because I didn't know it was going to go that far. But after rest and healing and being in a hidden place for a while, because that's what this was out in the desert, he was hidden for a while. He sort of ran off. You know, I think he mourned and felt guilty for what he did, and he wanted to be away, not to get in trouble, but also he just was like, I'm done. I guess that's it for me. But God said, no, I'm sending you back in. You've got a purpose. You have a purpose. You're going to heal. You're going to heal. You're going to bring healing. You're going to rescue. And that's what I think He's doing with a lot of us, is that we've been through the wilderness, but He's restored us and He's healing us and He's taken that strength, that scar tissue, that stronger tissue now. We are stronger than we were. And He's going to take us and put us out, not just so that we can go into the promise. It's not just about us. He loves us and wants us to be blessed tremendously, but it's about more than that. And we're going to go out and go forward. And we're not just going to go into the promise, we're going to lead other people into the promise and the promise of heaven, the promise of a relationship with God and their own personal dreams and promises. Because one thing I get really excited about is, you know, I want to be in my purpose, but the reason I want to is because part of my purpose is showing other people that they have a purpose and like lining them up with that in themselves to let them know that there's more to what they've had in their life. There's more to it. There's a purpose behind the pain, that there's strength that comes from the suffering, and that everything they've went through has made them who they are because God's going to use it. You know, whether on a small scale within their little circle of people that they're close to, or on a grander scale. And it doesn't matter how many people they may impact. What matters is that you're doing what you were created to do. And there's nothing like that feeling of knowing that you have a purpose and that there was a purpose to your pain. And whatever degree that may be, in whatever area, I really, really have a passion for helping people discover that. So I'm excited. I'm excited. And I'm excited for the good that God's gonna bring me, but I am really excited to think that all I've been through is not gonna be wasted. And all you've been through will not be wasted. It was not in vain. It was not purposeless. And here's the thing too. I think it's a key to healing for depression and even the spirit of suicide. I don't think people who have a strong sense of purpose kill themselves. I don't. When you know you have a purpose and you have hope of actually being able to live that out, purpose is what keeps you going when you're feeling hopeless. Because I've always said, I can suffer any kind of pain. From the time I was little, I've had a lot of stuff. And I've always said, if I know it's going to bless someone else, if there's a purpose, I can withstand it. Purposeless pain, nobody wants to be around for that. And I think that's where hopelessness comes. I think that's where the spirit of suicide comes. Suffering and suffering and suffering with no end in sight and no purpose and no benefit to the suffering. That's where that comes from. So I do believe that getting people in touch with their purpose and launching them toward that and letting them see reasons why they've been through what they've been through and why they are who they are, um, and how God has a very specific plan for their life, for themselves, but to impact others. You know, sometimes when you're depressed, if you've ever been depressed or suicidal, you might not feel like you can go on for yourself, but then you have this thought of, but what about my niece? You know, what would she do if she knew, if she had to find out I wasn't here? You know, or what about my kid? Of course, you know, now. What about my parents? What about my, best friend? You know, I might not be able to feel like I can keep going for myself at this moment because I'd rather not suffer and I'd rather not be in pain. But can I go through this pain so that I won't make them go through pain by being gone? Absolutely. Um, can I go through this pain because it's leading to something bigger and better? Yes. So I hope no one out there is at that point. But if you are, this is for you. Hold on. There is a purpose. There is a purpose in your pain. God does not let us suffer needlessly. He does not. And I'm not living my full purpose yet, but it's starting. It is starting. And I can tell you different ways about that. And I've got things to tell you later to make another video about ways that dreams God has given me. Dreams He gave me a year ago, last summer, and at the beginning of this year, have been coming true. They've been coming true. And the symbols in the dreams have actually showed up in my life on things to the point that people that I've told the dreams to in my life, like my daughter, different people, recognize it when it happens and go, Mom, what do you see this? And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. It's amazing. It is so amazing. And I can't wait to tell you those things. They are happening. All of them are not here, but they're gonna all come and they may come all at once. But I've got really exciting things to tell you about that too. But I do believe that the blessing or socks off has to come. I think there's a connection in all that. That it is a sign of the transaction, the public transaction, to show that the transaction is complete. And also that we're on holy ground. We are on holy ground. The Holy Spirit is in us, and I know you can feel it. I know you've seen it. So hold on. He is about to bless your socks off. I don't know how to do this.